12:59. Let me test everything to make sure that I am live. Can you guys hear me? All right, I see my sound meter. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of My Favorite Things. So for those of you who have not been following around, let me just show you where My Favorite Things is located and where we are. You can still catch up if you just got started. So my name's Yvonne, and let me go ahead and share my desktop so I can share this project with you. All right, so let me just share. So this one is found on my website at www.jellyrollclub.com. It's called My Favorite Things. There's a series of videos so you can watch the Get Started and all the handouts. It is not too late to jump in here. So for those of you who have been following along, we had a technical glitch last month that caused me a problem. So today we're going to be doing the buttons and the thread, the embroidery thread. So we're doing a double duty today. And I'm just going to show you my finished yarn and talk about the other yarn block that was a bonus block. So if you opened this one, there was a bonus block that I hadn't finished yet, and it was this one here, which is the crochet. But the previous block before that was the yarn ball, and so I included it twice so you can just see the yarn ball. I'm going to show you guys how my yarn ball turned out, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, does anybody have any questions? All right, a bunch of people jumping on. I needed to give you guys some time. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let me show you my supplies and let me show you where we are. All right, so today you're going to need this handout that says My Favorite Things. You don't have to print the entire thing, just print this page. This is one that we did the last time we were together before we had my technical glitch. And this is what the yarn ball ended up looking like. Remember, when you do fusible applique, it ends up reverse. It doesn't matter to me because I'm going to do the other one the other direction. But I used some free motion quilting, and if you notice, I did all of these lines to make it look dimensional, and instead of the little circles, I ended up with little hearts because I want little hearts on all of mine. But if you notice how flat my block is, and there's not any bird's nests, it's because of the way I do free motion stitching. You see that? There are no bird's nests in the entire thing, and I did it all in one swoop. So there's two ways of doing this. You can either use your walking foot or you can use your free motion foot. For this, I wanted my lines to be straight, so I used my walking foot. Does anybody have any questions about this particular block? Now, we've done several other things. For those of you who are just getting with us, we've done a sewing machine. This is My Favorite Things. So everything has a heart. If you notice, there's a heart on there. We've also done a rotary cutter, and there's a heart next to my rotary cutter. Maybe the heart's too big, but that's fine. And then I'm doing a little embroidery block. It looks like a little embroidery hoop, and this is going to be filled in. It's going to be a heart as well. And then I still have to finish. I've done a little bit of free motion stitching around this edge, but I'm probably going to do a little thicker line, so we'll see how that goes. If you notice, this one hasn't been trimmed because I'm not done sewing. All right, so let's talk about the little crochet hook. And I told you guys one of the things that I wanted to do was add embroidery. Now, one of the things that you have to remember, so you see that, it gives it dimension, right? So I'm stitching just a single stitch, like a chain stitch. It looks like this. You can either do the chain stitch in reverse, that means I'm coming from behind, and this is what you see in the front, or the opposite. And so all I've done is I've just taken my 6 strands of embroidery floss, and I've done a nice big heavy stitch because I wanted to be able to make it look like it's literally looping over the hook. And so to make the little knitting pattern, that's one of the things I told you I was going to show you, I'm just going to use a regular pencil like you would have in school, and I'm just going to come in like this, and I'm going to do like a V. So if you notice, I took in gray and I've made these little lines. So I made these little lines, and so now I'm going to come this direction, and then I'm going to do lines the opposite direction. I'm just going to kind of carefully sketch those. And then when I come through here, I'm just going to go opposite directions like this, like a V. And I'm going to free motion quilt this with my free motion foot, my darning foot, for those of you who know what that is. And so I'm just going to draw the lines. And so you can see it starts to look like crochet. It gives it that dimension. And so it's going to be little V notches like this. And then I'm going to come across with my free motion foot, and you can just go like this. And I'm just going to come in and follow that zigzag. And I'm using a 40 weight thread. So let me loop this out of the way. Let me move this out. And I'm going to pin this down so that it stays out of my hair. If you're ever in the middle of embroidery, you can just kind of pin it out of the way like this. And that'll just keep it out of the way. And make sure that when you are doing this kind of heavy stitching on your block like this one, that you have pre-shrunk this background. And by pre-shrinking it, what I mean is you're going to take, and see how this one's wrinkly? That's because I've starched it once and let it dry. And then I'm going to come back in again, and while it's wet, I'm just going to get it nice and wet with starch. I'm going to heat up my iron, and I'm going to flip it on both sides and make sure it's good and damp all the way through. And then I'm going to press this guy. And what I'm doing by doing this is I'm pre-shrinking that background. And so by giving it a lot of steam and a lot of starch, it'll do two things. It'll keep it from puckering when I'm appliquing, so I won't have to use interfacing. I'm adding a little water. And I also will get better stitches. So if you have like a nice papery texture to this applique, it just makes it a whole lot better. And so I just get it good and wet. Wait for my iron to heat up. If you don't want your iron to get all gummy and gooey, you can always use one of these Teflon pads, because your iron can get pretty gross if you iron wet starch. So I just use one of these kind of pressing cloths on mine. And what I'm trying to do, and you can hear it sizzling, is I'm just pre-shrinking that background. All right. If you don't want to free motion stitch, you can always, of course, use Inktense pencils and then heat set those, and ink becomes permanent. Inktense becomes permanent once you press it. All right, so once I have it pretty dry, then I can come back in and give it one light pressing. And what that does is it gives me a background that has the texture that I want. It's nice and stiff, because that's what I'm looking for when I'm trying to free motion applique with my machine. All right, so that's how I've prepared my other block. So now let me go over to the machine, and let's grab this guy that I was working on, okay? I've got these lines. If I didn't want to free motion these lines and just leave these curves, I could use my Inktense pencils, of course, and just draw those in. I could do that. And you can do that as well. So you don't have to do these lines. This is optional. Let me see if I have any questions. Can you use freezer paper instead of Teflon? Yes. You can use freezer paper instead of Teflon. And actually, it's probably better to use parchment rather than freezer paper. All right, so let's go over to the sewing machine and let me show you what I'm doing with this. I've got this threaded with 40 weight thread, which is thicker than piecing thread. Normally it's a 50 weight. I'm going to drop my feed dogs out of the way, and then I'm going to bring up my bobbin thread. I'm using a steel gray or a dark gray because that's neutral, and I can applique all of my blocks with one color. All right, so let me pull this up. See if I can pull that up. Yeah. There we go. So I've got my thread pulled up, and I want that below the foot. So now I'm going to throw those in the back behind me. And I'm going to work towards my body. So I'm going to come this way, pushing that way, and then I'm going to go this way. I'm not going to work side to side because that's what causes bird's nests. And so I'm not going to do it in that direction. So I'm going to come towards me. I'm going to drop, make sure your presser foot is engaged in the down position. And then I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread through the entire thing. You see it peeking through there? And I'm going to use a pin or a needle or tweezers, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to tease it back down, both of them, back towards the bottom. And so I'm going to get that in there, and I'm going to bring those towards me like that. So they're underneath my darning foot. And I just use like a big flower head pin that I keep handy. Now, the needle that I'm using is a Schmetz top stitch needle. So can you see that? It is an 80-12. I like that one because it has a big eye, and that ensures that I can thread it easy and feed this big thread without shredding. Okay, so I'm going to move it out of the way, and I'm going to take 1 or 2 stitches in place, moving it ever so slightly. And then I'm going to check that it's engaged, and it is. And I can pull this other thread out of the way, pull that one out of the way, and I'm going to work towards me. So I'm going to try to keep my hand out of the way, and then I can come along here. And just kind of zigzag to the next stitch. Then I'm going to follow along the bottom like this and go back the opposite direction. Like I said, this is not necessary. I just think this looks cute and it makes it look kind of like crochet. And so now I'm going to follow back down that stitched line, and then I'm going to go up. If you use a pencil, don't worry about making mistakes because you can wash those out with a little bit of Synthropol and a little washcloth. You can get those pencil marks right out. And so if you notice, I'm already getting those wavy lines that I'm looking for. If you find that you're kind of struggling to come down the side, just kind of turn it this way, and then you can rotate it back over here. Make sure that you can keep this where you can see the lines and try to keep those lines as even as possible. Go sideways just a hair, and then you can come back towards you. And it's easier than it looks, to be honest. All right, and let's continue. All right. All right, let's keep going this way and back up, and then back down and back up, and back down and back up and back down, and you're just gonna do it just like that. And so what that's doing is it's gonna give me that kind of look that it looks like it is crochet. And if you get off kilter like I just did on that one, I don't think you need to worry about it because sometimes my crochet is crooked. So that's fine. Like I said, if you struggle seeing where your lines are, just kind of flip it around to make it easier to see and get yourself back on track. And it's that simple. And if you don't like how it looks, it's not too painful to take it out, I promise you. All right, so I'm going to go back this way. And back down, up, and in the blink of an eye, you've completed that little look of crochet. Like I said, you can always do this with Inktense pencils if you don't feel like doing all of this stitch work. I like doing the stitch work because one of the things that stitching all of this does is it prevents this from puckering down the road if you ever wash it. So if you're using unwashed fabric, this kind of just keeps your applique from looking wonky down the road and getting poofy. All right, and so now I'm going to come back around across the bottom, and it's finished. And I came off of there just a little bit further away than I wanted to. And I'm going to cut this off, and then down the road, I'm just going to pull this out and bury that. And let me show you what that looks like. All right, so that's looking pretty good. All right. So if you notice, I now have that little yarn look, and if I want to, I can come back and do a little bit more thicker lines vertically, or I can enhance these lines with my Inktense, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a little bit of blue. Let me see what blue I have here. So I'm just going to go in here where I had the vertical yarn lines kind of coming through here. And what that's going to do is that's going to create a shadow with my Inktense pencils. And that's coming like this. And it's curving because it's going to give the appearance that that piece is kind of waving. Try not to make it very straight, because if you do, then it doesn't look like your piece is curving at all. Just like that. Come back the other direction. And I'm just kind of drawing the line between the stitches. And if you notice, look at how it starts to look. It starts to give it that dimension so that it's not just a blob. And then for Inktense, it's super easy. You just have some water. I pour a little bit in my cap. I save my little starch caps because these are great for this. And then I'm just going to take the majority of the water out of this. This is why I'm wearing an apron. And I dab it, and then I can just go in here like this, and it's going to create a shadow that's the same color as my stitching, just like that. And once this is heat set, you let this completely air dry and you set it with the iron. This is washable, and I will do a test because Tina wants me to do a test of what this looks like after you wash it. So I will definitely be doing that for you guys, just so you guys can see. I'll have a whole separate series that I will pre-record. But just like that, look at this. We're going to let that kind of bleed, and it's a lot, so it will spread out, and I'm okay with that. Gives it that little watercolor look. A little excess water there. I'm going to come in and I'm going to let that just kind of blend in. And just like that, it's starting to look to me three-dimensional. What do you guys think? All right, so that's what I'm going to do with this one. Super easy. So once it dries, it's going to have that kind of dimension, and it's going to make it look like the yarn. And once I get done, just going to let this air dry, and then I'm going to press it nice and flat, and that will heat set all of that stitching. And that's it. Super easy. All right, I'm going to move this out of the way. Does anybody have any questions about this particular block and how I was going to pull that one off? All right, the next block that I had was the buttons, right? And so this is going to be just like the other ones that we made. So I have the buttons, and what I did here is I just drew all of the buttons on fusible web, just like everything else. And I'm going to do these buttons just like I did that yarn. I'm going to give them some shading. If you notice, there's a little bit of color. And so I'm going to pull a piece of fabric that I'm going to use, and I just have a big stack here of scraps. It doesn't matter. I'm going to find one that my button's going to fit. That light blue is kind of nice. I might use a pink and have a pink button. These are 3.5-inch squares. How about green? We're going to do a green button. And then I'm just going to stack. These are just out of my scrap bin, nothing fancy there. And I'm going to press that just like we did the other ones. And I'm going to build that up with color before I free motion quilt. So I'm just going to stick that on there. Let me make sure it doesn't hang off of the edges, because what I don't want is glue on my ironing board. Move that out of the way. And that should fit inside a 3.5-inch square. All right, so once I have that, you're going to see these little circles, and those little suckers are hard to cut out. So the best tool for that is your seam ripper. So you can stick that seam ripper in the center and just kind of cut a little slit in those. And what that will do is that'll enable you to stick a fine scissor in there. And you can use a little pair of scissors like this, something like that, or you could even use, if you have those little applique scissors, something like that. And so you just want to stick that in there and cut that circle out. And that's not a tight, super tight squeeze, but it's a little bit small. So if you want to make these buttons a little bit bigger, you can. I made them so they fit inside like a 3.5-inch scrap that most of us have floating around in our sewing rooms, and you just make the holes like that. Like I said, you can always actually make these with your seam ripper if you really wanted to. If you're careful and you pinch it with your finger, you could go around with your seam ripper if you got a nice sharp one. But any kind of small pointed scissors will do. And you just cut those holes out before you do anything else. If you try to do this when the paper is gone, it's going to be a disaster. So just do that before. And then you just kind of turn it with your hand as you nip, little tiny nips, and that'll make sure that that edge is nice and smooth. Maybe when I retire, I'll buy one of those fancy cutting machines that cuts your pieces, applique pieces for you, but I don't know. I'm trying to really just sew with what I have on hand, and so I'm not trying to acquire any more tools. What about you guys? So the fusible that I use is Pellon 805. Somebody said, what do I use? And it's called Wonder Under Pellon 805. And I just buy it in like a 2-yard roll. And most of the time, a 2-yard roll will do an entire quilt with some leftover. All right, so now that I have it, yeah, grunge would be great for these buttons. I'm just going to trim the outside with my bigger scissors. Bigger scissors are better for bigger areas. They just are. You get nice clean cuts. All right, oops. And so for all of these buttons, I'm going to leave a little tiny rim, and that's what my button's looking like. So let me move all this stuff out of the way, and let me attach my first button to this one that I started here. Now I'm going to find the center. Let me see, this has that tone on tone that ends up looking like snow, so I'm going to use the wrong side of this fabric. This is slightly bigger than what I need, so it's 9 by 11 instead of 8 by 10, and so I'm just going to find the center, because once I'm done doing the applique, then I will trim it down to size. So applique first, trim next. All right, I'm going to put this button right over here in this area, which is where I want it, and I'm going to go ahead and do the first one. Score that with the back of the seam ripper, not the front. Don't tear it up and then cry about it, because I've done that before. You're in the middle of something, you're watching some kind of murder mystery, and the next thing you know, it's over. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and fuse that down, keeping it right along kind of this center edge, because I'm going to put little buttons over in here and then a bigger button down at the bottom. So I'm going to keep my bigger button in this area right next to these two. So I'm just going to go ahead and press. Yep, that iron got cold, so I'm going to press that. And I'm also going to add a little bit of an Inktense pencil to give it a shadow. So I'm going to do that as I press. So this one is green. I may use this limey green, and then I may come back with a darker green. Let me see, what's that one? That's teal green, so I don't want that. And then this is like a leaf green. So I've got a leaf green and an apple green to make the shadows to my button. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to the top of this button right here on that edge. And I want that button to be dimensional looking. So I'm just going to kind of draw that right there. And then I'm going to take a tiny bit of water, ever so tiny bit of water, onto that spot. So I'm going to take my water that I have here, and then you don't want almost any water on there. So you're just going to get it all off, and then you're going to just brush barely any water right along that edge. Because all I'm trying to do is give it a little shadow to make that button look dimensional. I don't want to get too carried away. And then I'm going to grab a little water onto my hand like that, very little water, and I'm going to brush it right there. If you put a bunch of water, it'll just smear everywhere and you're going to be really sad, so don't do that. So all I'm doing is a little bit of a shadow on that button, and I'm going to press the whole thing down. And that'll dry it and set the ink. All right, so now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a dark, so this is that dark leaf green. I'm going to make a border all the way around, and this is going to be really cute. I like how this is looking. And then I'm going to go over this with a little bit of thread. So this will give me a drawing line, and I'm just doing it like this. I'm just kind of following this line, and that'll give my button dimension, because I don't want my button to be boring. And if your button's not perfect, that's okay too. So I'm just going to do a little bit of leaf green. And in the picture, if you notice, there's a little bit of shadow in the button, and so you can just add a little bit of, like, do some little X's right here, and then do a few little X's right over here. And so I'm just going to go over this one more time, maybe add a little bit more dimension to these buttons across the top, and just make my buttons look more 3D. If you notice what I'm doing. Again, I'm going to take a tiny bit of water, little minuscule amount, rub it on your hand, and then just come in here like this. And you're just getting it damp, barely damp. And look what I'm doing. I'm making a little shadow. Happy little trees, right? Do you guys remember that guy? My favorite dude that used to do happy little trees. This is a happy little applique. And look, all of a sudden that button is starting to have dimension. I buy these pencils on Amazon. If you go, I will post the link on my Facebook page and also on my channel. If you go, there's a little page that I have. And these are wonderful little pencils. And what they do is they create a nice bit of extra detail in your applique. Look at that. So now my button's looking really cute, and I like how it looks. And so I'm going to go ahead and let it dry for a second. And what these are, for those of you who are wondering, these are Derwent ink pencils, and they become permanent. So these are ink pencils. So what this is like a solid form of like India ink. And then what happens is once you heat set it, you can wash it. So there we go. So I'm going to heat set that for a second. And look at that. And so now my button is looking three-dimensional. Now I'm going to want to add a little bit more dark green to the outside. So this one is like a teal green. So I'm going to add this teal green just to the outside like this. And I'm going to give it a shadow. So this is a darker kind of a tealish green. And I'm going to add it to the outside of my button just to make it look the way I want. There we go. Look at that. So now my button is looking dimensional. It's not looking flat. And I'm going to come in here, get rid of the excess, and just I'm going to tease it towards the inside. So I'm pulling, if you notice, I'm pulling my paintbrush towards me so that it doesn't get on the backing, on the back. So I'm going to pull that towards me, just barely brushing it. You're not getting it super wet, and I'm coming it back in here. And then I'm just kind of whisking the surface just till it's barely damp. And look at that button. So now that button is looking like it's got some character to it. See it? And if it blends just ever so slightly, you just keep moving it around with the dry bristles. So my bristles are pretty dry. So what do you guys think? Do you guys like that? Let me see if I can do. So now if I wanted to, I could come in with a darker color, like a little bit of brown or even some black. So this color is called bark. I could come in here and give it a little bit of bark on the tops of those button areas like this. I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you guys like that? I think this is looking pretty good. Come in here and just make that a little bit darker. And now, just like I did with the other, I still have some bark left over on my brush. I'm going to come in and I'm going to make a little bit of a shadow. And then I'm going to just kind of blend this in this area. And so now there's a shadow on my button. This one has a lot more water because I'm trying to blend it in and make it look blurry. So now this little part here, I'm just kind of smashing my brush down. And I think that my button is going to look just fine. Going to let it dry. Then I'm going to set it with some heat. And if you notice, when I heat set that, that lightens it up. And I think that my button is now ready for some stitching. So now I can go over this with a little bit of some steel gray to give it some dimension. So I'm just going to stitch right in the center of that. And then that one will be almost done. And so you see how easy this is? There's not a whole lot. So like once you guys get the hang of this, you're going to be like, why didn't I do this before? So don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone. I know some of you guys are like, oh, I'm not artistic, but yes, you are. You have to believe that you are. And look, I don't know how to thread my own sewing machine, people. So every time it gets unthreaded, I got to use this because I really don't know how to use the automatic threader. So it's going to be what it's going to be. All right, so let me just push that in there. Goodness gracious, these old arthritic fingers are not helping me. All right. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to come and I'm going to go right inside the edge of that button. I'm going to pull that thread up through the back. See how it came up? Just pull it all the way up. Then lift this and tease that out from underneath. I don't need that up there. All right, and I'm going to kind of come back down. I'm going to take 1 or 2 stitches, move these out of my way So I'm going to move it out of the way, and I'm going to take a couple of anchoring stitches. And then I'm going to lift that back up and move all this mess out of my hair. All right. Because what I don't want is all of this out of the way. I could even cut it at this point. Once it's anchored, you're fine. But my foot has a notch right here, and that notch is what I use to follow so that I get a very accurate little button. And so I'm just going to use that notch. I'm going to use both of my hands, and I'm going to carefully turn it, making sure that that presser foot is down, because otherwise you get bird's nests. And so now I'm just coming through here, and that nice thick thread is going to give it dimension. Anchor my button. If I wanted to, I could do some stitching on the outside, like a zigzag stitch, which I might do, just to make sure that that button stays exactly where I want it to stay once I wash this and use this quilt. Maybe this one's going to hang on my wall in my sewing room. I haven't decided yet, but we'll see. Right now I'm only making one of each block instead of two, because I'm probably going to make mine smaller. So once I get there, I'm going to just go back and forth, and I can cut that, and that one is finished. And so let me show you what this looks like. And I think that that's looking pretty good. And so I'm going to do all of my buttons exactly the same way. Just like that. I can trim that. And this is why you kind of backstitch at the end. And then when you flip it around to the back, I don't have a bunch of bird's nests. I'm going to trim that knot. If you're concerned that that might come out, put a little bit of fray check. All right, so there it is. That's what it looks like. I'm really happy with how this turned out. And so friends, this is how all of this goes. Now, this right here, same exact thing. I don't need to show you the same thing 3 times. I'm just using some Pellon 805. If you notice, when you trace these, I started here, traced this first segment, moved it down to the next portion, lined it up really close, drew it, moved it down, drew the next one. And the reason I do that is because there's less waste. Instead of drawing this entire thing, I only drew this little tiny short thing. You see how much shorter that is? So I'm not wasting 1.5 inches of fabric. Now this will all fit on a jelly roll strip. All of these will. So if you have leftover jelly roll strips, these are about 6 inches long, and this should all fit on a jelly roll strip if you want to do that. So this is it, friends. This is all that we're doing. I'm going to put gray fabric for all of these little bits here. I'm going to put gray fabric, and then just like I did the other ones, I'm going to free motion stitch those lines that you see on thread. So I'm going to take just my free motion stitching, and I'm just going to go like this, and I'm going to come inside here until I get to the bottom, and then I'm going to jump, go all the way around, and then do the next section. And I'm just going to go like this, jump across, so you know how to go, come this way. And I practice on paper just like this so that I know which way I'm going to sew. And then for this, I'm just going to come, wrap around, wrap this way, wrap back around, and then I can sew like this, or I can jump. Then you're going to come and sew around, and then you're going to sew just like this. You're going to come in and you're going to sew about 1/16 of an inch apart those lines. And then when you get here, then you can just tie it off and finish. And this is how you're going to do this free motion quilting. You're going to start in one area and work back and forth. Then you're going to jump to this area, work your way across. You're going to do the same thing, and then you're going to work your way around. All right, this is it, friends. This is all that I have for you guys tonight. You guys can do that. If you are new to my channel, we're working on a scrap challenge. Do you see that behind me? Those are my scrap challenge block ones. I have one already done that's a bunch of different colors that I started last night, and then I kept going and I made 4 more, so I might make an entire quilt with block 1. Then if you haven't checked out Walk by Faith, that's another scrappy block. So that's my birds in the air right there. So if you want to make yours, I've got this one back here, which is another project. I know, I feel crazy. And I also have my Walk by Faith blocks that I'm making with a group of my beloved friends. And so the Jelly Roll Club started with just a small group of friends, and we used to meet by Zoom, and they encouraged all my craziness, and so now we have Jelly Roll Club on social media. But if you want to make this block here, this is a great scrap buster. Go ahead and bust out all of those Jelly Roll scraps. You can do that too. All right, friends, have a wonderful evening. Give it a thumbs up if you like the stuff on this channel. Ring that bell so you get notified, and thank you for your support. I appreciate you. You guys have a wonderful rest of the week. My winter break is over, and I've got to teach tomorrow. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks, everybody. It's going to be great.